Okay, hello and welcome to the MSDynamicsWorld.com Spring 2014 BI Webcast Series. I'm Jason Gumpert, and today we are going to be learning about data integration best practices for Dynamics ERP implementations with Lean implementation expert, author, and Dynamics GP MVP, Gloria Braunschweig. Gloria is a longtime friend of ours, and we are really glad to have her with us today to talk about project management and data integration concerns. So as we get started, I just want to add that we do invite you to add your feedback and ask questions today. You can use the Q&A tab that you'll see in the webcast session here on the right to ask your questions during or after the presentation. And be on the lookout for a couple of poll questions that we'll be running during the session too. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome Gloria B. Gloria, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you should have controls. So please go ahead.
Okay. So we're here today to discuss data integration, especially legacy data integration for an initial implementation, and talk about how we can do that rapidly. The biggest question I get is, can we do a quality implementation if we use rapid techniques? And the concept of rapid is synonymous with lean implementation and successful implementation. The most successful implementations tend to stay on schedule. They are rapid. They use a lot of technical techniques to import data and get the system ready. So with a lean, rapid implementation, to be successful, you have to concentrate on the highest value services. Lean goes towards high value. If you're going to implement lean and rapid, you're going for the highest value. As an expert in the field, I think after 35 years I can say I'm an expert in the field. It's my position that small company implementations fail or are compromised more often than they succeed and meet all of their goals. Small business owners and managers tend to make decisions based on economics. They're risk takers. So telling them that they'll likely fail in an implementation if they don't do something right usually falls on deaf ears. And the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons. The basic one that's put forth in an implementation or an IT project is that there's a lack of management support. The owner says, hey, I want a dashboard, an executive dashboard. I want better cash information. I want better sales information. I need to look at expenses and control those. So they choose a system and direct an implementation team. But then they walk away from it. That's very common. And they come back a few months later and ask, well, why isn't it working? Why aren't I getting what I needed? And the problem is that the small business manager and owner is juggling priorities, and their priorities change very fast, and they don't have the resources to meet all of them. So they don't provide the necessary resources for consulting, for integration, for temporary staff, for training, for data integration, for prototyping. And the small business manager is very prone to piling additional projects onto the project team. And if the project team is comprised only of their existing employees, it's very likely that he's been expecting them to complete their other full-time job in addition to the data integration. So we'd like to direct them to do things differently. We certainly try to direct them as project managers and implementation specialists to do things differently. In the live presentation of this material, I usually do this game that emulates the NCIS head slap. It doesn't work too well over the internet, but just envision that of, you know, guys, you're not doing it right, and the book was written to provide that verbal head slap. But I'm pretty convinced that small business managers aren't going to change their ways. So from an implementer standpoint and a project manager standpoint, we simply have to take each component and break it down and develop alternatives to reduce the cost and reduce the time to implement. So today, what we're going to do is a deep dive into one of those components, which is a big cost factor in most implementations, and that's the data integration. So the first step, the small businesses are going to want to integrate data, and they have various reasons for that, and it's important to develop an understanding of those reasons. So we have a little poll, if you're ready, Jason, to find out why people are listening today and why they would want to integrate data. So,
okay, and that poll should be up now.
Good. So one of the leading reasons is historical data for reference for sales and inventory transactions, comparative financial information for reporting and analysis. They may want employee payroll and HR records. They may want payables and purchase order data for costing comparisons. So we'd like to understand why you're attending today so we meet your needs, and then we'll find out specifically why you think you need to integrate legacy data.
And let me just add, we're going to close this out now. If you have other reasons or other concerns that maybe you didn't see in that list, feel free to add something and add a comment in the chat as well. We'll take that into considerations.
Okay.
All right, let me see if I can show those poll results now.
Okay, so we've got the largest percentage planning for an implementation, 15% looking for technical information on integrations. And that's interesting to me, D, looking to integrate after an implementation. Okay, and then can we go to the second poll, Jason?
Okay, so that one should be visible now, and we can give that one a few seconds as well.
Okay.
Again, if you have sort of an other answer, feel free to fill it in the chat. All right, let's say a 5-second warning here, and then we will close this one out and show the results. All right. Gloria, are you able to see those results?
Yes, now I see. So historical reference and comparative financials are leading. Yep. That's pretty much what I expected. Okay, so let's develop an understanding of the legacy data and what it consists of. And legacy data is going to fall into two buckets pretty clearly, master records or transaction records. Now, master records are by far the easier integration. Those are records like GL accounts, customer accounts, vendor accounts, inventory items, employee master records. They may be extremely complex, or they may be less complex with things like payment terms, credit limits, shipping methods, tax codes, that type of information. They can be complex, but from a technical standpoint, the records will have a high degree of similar mapping between the legacy system and the new system. An address field is an address field. Sometimes we deal with block address fields, for instance, where you've got, say, 200 or 300 characters to have a contact name, street address 1 and 2, city, state, zip, country. In the Dynamics product, they don't tend to use address blocks as much. Each field is delineated out. So you've got a contact name field. You've got address 1, address 2, address 3, city, state, zip, country. But generally, mapping master records is fairly straightforward. Transaction records, on the other hand, are much more difficult. And if you start with a base of, say, an inventory item, it's going to potentially have customer information, vendor information. It could have MRP information about economic order quantity, min-max levels, that type of thing. Then you go to the purchase order side. You go into the payable side linked to that. You cross over and go into the sales transaction side. So what the example shows you is that transaction records can be extremely complex, and they are created by the system as the transactions are input, so they're heavily linked. And one of the most complicating factors is over in the payable side, when you're paying transactions, and you pay invoice 1, 2, and 3 in full. You put a hold on part of number 4. You apply a credit memo from the vendor, and that's just the first check. You go to the second check and you're paying 15 invoices. You have to reverse the credit memo for some reason. You're short paying again and have another invoice on hold. Transaction records are a mess of spaghetti that has been thrown against the wall in most situations, and they get extremely complex to integrate. So we kind of loop back around to why did the customer want to integrate in the first place? What did they want to do with the integrated data afterwards? And usually your technical people are on one side of the equation of saying less is better, and the customer and the employees are saying no, more is better. So you have to strike a happy medium that the company can afford and that the technician can accomplish. So as a project manager, that's the first evaluation that has to go on, and it can get pretty intense. Talking about alternatives with integration, there's a whole group of alternatives and best practices. As a project manager, the team can be led to the first alternative of don't integrate anything, just start typing. We have done implementations like that. We've done implementations where we integrated just the master records. We go a little bit further. We integrate the master records, the vendors, the customers, the GL accounts, and then we integrate open transactions. You can get a little bit deeper and selectively import. We did one import where they wanted the payables data and they didn't give a darn about how the payables were paid. So we imported, treating each payables transaction as though it was fully paid immediately with a quick check. So it was one invoice, one check. They were looking at just the payables information and the distribution back to the general ledger. We've done implementations that we have worked on data integration for 6 months because they want to bring it all over. You have an alternative where you can take the legacy data into a data warehouse. I'll talk a little bit more about that. A common alternative, if the old system can be left around, is to isolate that old system, prevent new entry into it, and use it for reference. So you choose not to integrate, you just go simply back to the legacy system. And that can be commingled with this concept of a data warehouse. With a data warehouse, you're not setting up the transactional capability of the data. You're not going to enter more things into it. You're not going to process purchase orders, pay payroll, or pay bills. You simply bring the data into a data warehouse for reporting purposes, and you leave the legacy system behind. Maybe it's a 20-year-old IBM AS400 or something, so it's on its last legs. You bring the data into, most often, a SQL database, and it just sits there for reporting purposes. That's a very common method. So working through this as a project manager, you find out why the customer wants to integrate, how they're going to use the data after it's integrated, and then you choose the best method among all the alternatives that you have. Did an integration once for a fairly complex company, a family group that owned a large share of a public company, and the public company maintained all of the accounting records for both themselves and for the family group in an Oracle system. When Oracle bought that particular financial package, they warned all their customers they had 1 year to switch over to the type of licensing that Oracle had in place at that time. That meant that that family group, which was fairly small, even though they held a large percentage of stock in the public company, they were going to be facing $5.5 million just in license maintenance costs alone because they had so many company data sets. So the implementation of Great Plains was about 1/20th of the cost annually that Oracle licensing was going to require. So the family group would no longer, they had a drop-dead date, and after that date, they had no access whatsoever to that old data. So we had to integrate everything over. And it took an individual about 6 months to integrate all of that data for about 55 companies. So it was pretty intensive. One of the things that we run into when we're doing that type of data integration, the biggest one is the cleaning of the data. The whole process is generally called extraction, ECL, extraction, clean, and load. It can also be called ETL for extract, transform, and load. So the transform is definitely the most difficult part. That's where you're taking an address block and parsing it into address fields. You're reading particular codes where you might have values of 0, 1, 2, 3, and you have to figure out what those codes stand for in the old system and transform them into what the new system requires there, which might be ABC or it might be a text field. So there's a lot of cleaning and loading. I also had a recent question. Somebody called me and said, we've got 80,000 customer records, but only 27,000 of them are good. Is there a decent way to integrate that and clean it? And the answer is no. There's no decent way. It's just plain difficult work. You have to decide whether the customer or the technician is going to clean the data. And when it involves something like 27,000 out of 80,000 records, you can have the client go through and mark them active, inactive, and then technically remove the inactive records from the system. But somewhere there has to be a field to lock on to be able to technically eliminate 80% of the records. So we get down to developing, as a project team, developing that concept of how difficult data integration is, why we want to integrate it, and we come to a decision point of import only what you need. Now, there's tools to do this with. One of the tools, and they're available for Exapta, AX, GP, Great Plains, and Navision, and the tool is called Rapid Start. Rapid Start is based on this balancing concept of bringing in only what the customer needs. And we have used Rapid Start and can implement a company in 2 hours if needed. Rapid Start has got several capabilities. I'm most familiar with the Dynamics GP Rapid Start tool, but it's going to import the master records and import the open transactions. And that's the basic start for a system. It's that balance between the two worlds of don't integrate anything versus integrate everything. It's a great tool to use for prototyping because you can import the data very rapidly. We've done implementations in as few as 2 hours. It has the capability to allow you to dump the data into Excel worksheets. In fact, they are the staging database for the data, where you can transform it and then go through the second motion to integrate it, so it doesn't have to go QuickBooks to GP. You can stop in the middle in Excel and edit the data. If you do edit the data, the one trick that we learned is to take a text copy of the Rapid Start worksheets, dump it into a standard Excel worksheet, manipulate it there, and then as text, paste it back. It's a little bit more difficult to edit it in the macro-enabled worksheet. The Rapid Start works with QuickBooks or Peachtree because of its capability to transform in Excel. The other way that it can be used is you use a method to get the data into Excel, and then Rapid Start will assist you with populating the data. It's a little bit faster than using some of the other data integration tools. To supplement Rapid Start, we've used both SQL and Microsoft Excel. We also, one of the most common things that happens in transformation is a small company will want to change their general ledger account codes, and that's very easy to do with either Rapid Start or the Dynamics GP Integration Manager has a translation table. And you can also integrate the QuickBooks GL accounts as they are, and then once they're in Dynamics GP, you can use the Professional Services Tools library. It's nicknamed Pistol. I called it Postal for years, but it's actually really stable and very powerful. So you can use the account modifier and combiner. And You can use that tool, for instance, on there we go. There's the tool. You can use it on vendors and customers and inventory items and employees and the general ledger to transform data. You can combine vendors. If you've had a vendor, the wayward vendor, if you've had it created in the legacy system under the, and you've had it created under wayward, you can combine those two vendor records. So in that regard, Pistol is very powerful and is a very frequently used tool. I think it was about 2010, 2011, Microsoft bundled it in with the Service Manager. So it's no charge. It comes with the System Manager now, and some of the capabilities of it are actually being dropped into the data to use simply from the Utilities menu. So we go into this extract, clean, and load concept a little bit more. As a project manager, again, you find out why do we need to integrate. You select what you're going to integrate, and then you develop a plan. One of the issues is to find out who's most familiar with the legacy system data structure. So you find the person who can translate the old system. Are they going to cooperate with extracting data? If you're leaving them behind, you may be facing some change management problems that have to be addressed. Is it legal to access that system to extract the data? And what about the size, speed, and stability of the legacy system? With that family group that we integrated data for, when the Oracle consultant found out what we were going to do, he reported it back up to Oracle and told Oracle that the customer and the implementer, me, were going to dive into the code, translate it all, and convert the data. And the next thing I knew is I got served with a restraining order and had to act fairly quickly to stay in business. We eventually got on the phone with 2 attorneys from Oracle, 2 attorneys from Microsoft, 2 attorneys from the parent public company, 2 attorneys from the family group company, me and my attorney. And my attorney and I had a great relationship, and his #1 rule was sit there and don't open your mouth, which I thought was just great. And we listened for about 40 minutes out of a 45-minute phone call while attorneys just ripped at each other. And I had written a 1.5 pages of what we were going to do technically. And finally, the senior Oracle partner on the line said, well, I've got this document, looks fine to me. Who wrote it? I squeaked out, me, and everybody signed off on it, and we went ahead. But sometimes your legacy systems can get a little picky about what you're doing to that legacy software. I had another recent large integration. The data was on an AS400, and the drive was so full that we could not extract data from the old system, because to output the file of data that we could read, the old system had to write a temp file, and there wasn't any room on the hard drive to write the temp file. So we had to break the system apart. We pulled the payables data off, for instance, just completely removed the files to make room on the disk, and we extracted the sales data. Then we put the payables data back on. We took the sales data tables off, and we extracted the payables data. And we had to do it a third time for the financial data. So it took us about 2 months because that AS400 system crashed 6 to 8 times a day trying to do that load of extracting data. So it was very, very time consuming. And there were parts of the data we were never able to access. On the other side of the coin, you have to look at the data integrator who's pushing the data into the new system. And you certainly want to go with somebody who is experienced, who's done it before. You're in the best of both worlds if that person has experience with both the legacy system and the new system. But the issue is always going to be compatibility of tools. You certainly don't want to take somebody, I've seen this done, where you send them to, say, a 8-hour class on Excel and then expect them to be an Excel expert with data integration. We've seen that with SQL, with Visual Basic, with Microsoft Access. You want an experienced person doing the data integration so they know what they're doing. They're not reinventing the wheel. You have to find out what tools they are familiar with. You have to provide that individual, if it's going to take them 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months to do data integration, you want them to have a reasonable environment. Over the 25 years, me and my employees have had to work in 3 bathrooms. With one of them, the servers were in the shower stall, and the shower was not disabled. Fortunately, nobody turned the faucet on, but it was always there. The other one, it was in the ladies' restroom, so every time somebody had to use the restroom, the technician had to leave. The third one was the guys could only laugh about. In order to get to the server, we had to sit on the toilet to type at the keyboard and see the screen. And the owner of that small business thought that was pretty funny. The guys were not too happy about that one. One of the things with data integration and one of the things with an implementation that I really strongly believe in is prototype. I'll give up a whole lot of things. I will cut corners in a lot of places before I will cut a prototype. And data integration is typically run through about 3 stages. You'll take a very small portion of the data, maybe only a couple hundred records in fact, and work with that data integration so you understand and develop the mapping. Then in the real prototype, in a second stage prototype, you're going to make a pass at the data, and you're typically going to take, a couple of years of history, for instance, or you're going to take the majority of the customer vendor records, the master records, and you're going to set up that prototype. You're going to test how it has to be linked. You're going to give the customer and all of the employees the opportunity to test that data and see if it's going to meet their needs. So that second stage prototype can be longer than the live implementation quite frequently. And then you have to do the final integration for the go live. Maybe if your second stage prototype integrated only historical data, you may be able to supplement that go live with just refreshing the most current data. But you're typically going to go in 3 stages. Okay, Jason, how are we doing on time? Looks like we're pretty good here.
Yeah, 25 minutes left.
Yep. So with data integration, extract, we've talked about that. Transform. Transform is what we consider as technicians the most challenging part. It's the fun part sometimes. We refer to them as magic SQL fingers There's a lot that you can do with SQL query on transforming data and cleaning it up. Take that address block field in a transformation. If you're using an old legacy system that deals with an address block, in the transformation you have to look for a character that's going to indicate that you're at the end of the contact name. You're at the end of the address line 1. You're at the end of address line 2. You're looking at city. You're looking at state. You're looking at zip code. So you've got to look for clues. Those clues are probably most commonly one of several types of carriage returns, or you may get down to the point where you're looking for punctuation or spaces, especially when you get down to the city, state, zip. That type of work is called parsing. And again, you're dealing with an experienced technician who knows what he's got to do, he or she has got to do to parse that information into the correct fields. Then you're looking at somebody who's just simply going to sit there and eyeball those records and see if they are correct. So the transformation part can be fairly complex. We look also at what's called normalized and denormalized data. Now, denormalized means a human can read it. Normalized data means the computer can read it. Back when we translated that Oracle data, the particular system just simply had addresses. Another field indicated, is this an employee address? Is this a vendor address? Is this a customer address? Is it a ship-to address, a remit-to address? So there were other fields that indicated how those addresses were used. And as part of the restrictions in that particular deal, we could not see the headers in the data files. All we got was raw data. So with the customer's help, we were doing okay. We could tell customers from vendors, and you get into the transactional data and you start seeing things that you indicate, you know, what kind of transaction it is. We had difficulty ultimately with one field, and we didn't know what to do with it. About 6 months after we finished the integration, the customer hit year end, and they gave us a call and said, hey, we finally figured out what that field means. It means it's a vendor 1099 record. And so we had to go back and technically insert all of their markers to indicate a vendor was a 1099 vendor. And we did that with SQL rather than using the system to do it, because again, we had 3.3 million lines of data that we took into the Dynamics GP, so that was fairly extensive. Have to have a sip of my tea here. Already talked a little bit about the Professional Services Tools Library, and the service pack with Microsoft Dynamics GP 2013, I think it's Service Pack 2, was just announced and released just in the last few weeks. And I know that some of the Pistol tools are now incorporated as utilities. And with that incorporation of those tools, there's a little bit easier to use interface on those particular tools. Another tool that we developed, Computeration developed, and I noticed on Jason's first slides that he had a logo there for ZAP. Well, this is a different ZAP. If you've ever dealt with copywriting, it's next to impossible to copyright or trademark a word that already exists. You have to create a new word to be able to trademark it anymore. So ZAP as a word cannot be trademarked. So I think there are about 3 ZAP tools in the Microsoft Dynamics market. Ours is a fairly simple, straightforward one. We call it ZAP integration. It is unique to Dynamics GP, and it can integrate general ledger, receivables, and payables, historical, open, and work transactions, fully linked, taking them from QuickBooks and inserting them into GP, even to the point where you can drill down from the general ledger back to the payables transaction and back to the sales transaction. You can go into those historical transactions and void them, and they will have the correct distribution, because the distribution, the commissions, the taxes, the multi-currency, and the analytical accounting data is also integrated with ZAP integration. So it was developed to be fairly comprehensive for those small integrations that involve those particular characteristics of multi-currency and analytical accounting. And it works fairly rapidly. We've done integrations with SAP on historical transactions, and it processes, depending on the hardware, 10 to 20,000 records in an hour. So with the typical QuickBooks implementation having about 35,000 records, that ZAP integration tool can get an integration of that historical data done in just a matter of hours. So if you use Rapid Start, it's not going to bring over the history, but the ZAP integration as a supplement can bring the history. So in less than a day, we can do a QuickBooks to Dynamics GP implementation. And that's just a technical part of the implementation. Typically, you use the tools once for the prototype, and then you use them again for the go live, and you sandwich all of the other project management things into the middle, including the training and consulting and change management processes. We can talk a little bit about third-party products to help with data integration, data warehousing, and reporting after the implementation. Now, since reporting is going to be one of the primary reasons you do data integration, during the prototype you're going to do a great deal of testing of that. And it's actually using the prototype system where you develop the custom reports, the executive dashboard, to make sure all that is working first before you go into live. If you're in a situation, I had one with a health organization that contacted us with a 3-week time frame. It's not very realistic to make a decision and want to implement inside of 3 weeks. They had a deadline, and that's what the owner wanted. They had not even selected hardware, or in their particular case, a hardware host at the time. That's a pretty tight time frame to use to test out your prototype, test out your reports, develop your executive dashboard. So in a lot of rapid implementations, the first thing we do is get Dynamics GP up to where it's providing the absolute minimum of functionality comparable to what they had in QuickBooks. And then we go on after the implementation and do the reporting, the executive dashboard, that type of thing. That's a dangerous way to proceed, because you've made the huge investment in employee time and training to get up onto the new system before they really know if it's going to meet their needs, but it can be done with that sequence. Third-party products that help with data integration, the most popular ones are add-ons to Excel. And you can go online, talk to some of the personnel at Find Solutions and talk to them about those data integration tools. They are going to include products like Jet Reports. Jet Reports is an Excel add-on that was developed for Dynamics NAV. Then they expanded to Dynamics GP and now to Dynamics AX. So their Jet Reports is available for all three of those Dynamics products. Jet Reports has the capability to either tap into the products or tap into a data warehouse. There's also a tool called BI360, very popular, probably high-end for a lot of small companies, but a very powerful tool. Another common one is a product called F9. Then you get into outright tools that everybody knows. It's a matter of how experienced and really what's their expertise. And you can outright use Excel. You can use SQL tables and SQL query. You can use good old Microsoft Access. All of these tools are capable of doing reporting and printing forms. Access is probably better on outputting the forms rather than the reports. You've got tools like Crystal Reports to use, and it's all a matter of expertise with the client. What are they comfortable with, or what is the professional comfortable with that they're working with? So we're getting close to the end here, and the most rapid implementation is always going to be a successful implementation. If data integration is really expensive, the best thing to do is dive deep into why does the company want to do the data integration, what are they going to use it for, and then cover all the alternatives for what they can do. Some of the really simple alternatives we've done, we've had clients print legacy data into PDF files that then they can do searches on. That's actually fairly effective if it's not a great deal of historical data. So you can choose to make some decisions to implement rapid and lean. You're going to concentrate on high value and the highest value data integration and activities. And what we're aiming for is that the implementation is more successful. The book is on Amazon. There's more information on the website, rapidimplementation.com. And you've got a team of Dynamics GP, AX, and CRM experts at Find.com. So, do we have any questions?
All right, thanks, Gloria. And yeah, I'd like to invite our audience to please do enter your questions into the Q&A block that you see on the right of the slides right now. We have a few minutes to get to those questions, or to just share your experiences on what you've dealt with on data integration needs. I think some of the evaluation points that you made, Gloria, are pretty interesting. One question that came in a little while ago, and I hope I interpreted it right, but you were showing the pistol tool for GP, and someone asked, is there something that you know of that's comparable in AX?
I believe there is something comparable in AX. Pistol was developed by Microsoft Consulting probably 10, 12 years ago. It was an accumulation of the various tools that the consultants were using to integrate and transform data. Eventually, it was compiled into a tool that was initially sold just to resellers and then was opened up and sold to clients, and now it's just part of the system manager. So I'm absolutely positive that there are comparable tools for AX. Whether they're bundled in a package like Pistol, I'm not certain of that.
You know, Gloria, you mentioned being very careful and diligent with your evaluation of your needs for data integration. Can you think of any other examples maybe where the evaluation led to a decision that data integration investments weren't worth the expenditure?
Definitely, probably almost half the time. Once the client finds out how much time and expense it's going to take to integrate data, that's when they start taking a real hard look at alternatives. And again, we've taken data to PDF files, to Excel tables, to SQL tables, and then done the data warehousing and the, linked back into it with various other tools, or especially if, we extract data into Excel tables. The client just maintains the data and uses it for reference. So very common to integrate data once they find out the expense.
We have a question here from Philip. How do you integrate transactions into project accounting and cash book bank management?
Well, with a great deal of difficulty, unfortunately. Project management is probably the most complex one to integrate into. A lot of both project management and manufacturing records have to be integrated in using SQL query. So you've got a data warehouse that has to be created. You've got a lot of transformation to go through to map the structure of the legacy system into the structure of the new project management or manufacturing system. And the integration tools that commonly exist don't include project management or manufacturing. Our manufacturing specialist that we use has got SQL query tools and data structure that she's used over and over for a number of years. So it gets down into find yourself an experienced technician that's done it before, rather than being talked into recreating the wheel on either project accounting or manufacturing.
Okay, great. Well, we are at the end of our question queue. I'll make a last call here for other questions. And otherwise, we can start wrapping up. So today's session is being recorded. And Gloria, I want to thank you for your time today and sharing your knowledge with us and with our audience.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everyone for attending today. We really appreciate it. Please be on the lookout for more BI sessions coming up this spring. If you don't mind, please do fill out the survey. It'll only take about 15 or 30 seconds after you close out the session. We always appreciate the feedback, and our presenters do as well. So thanks in advance for that. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up now. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you, Jason.